Have you ever felt like everything in your life collapsed at the same time, so completely that you no longer knew where to begin again? Not the kind of loud failure, but a quiet unraveling. The things that once gave you the sense of who I am suddenly start to feel unfamiliar. Work no longer means anything. Relationships no longer hold you up. Even the image you once believed was you begins to crack. From Carl Jung's perspective, when everything falls apart, what's happening is not a mistake that needs fixing, but a psychological process that needs understanding. Jung believed that there are seasons in life when the old ego must dissolve, allowing a person to move closer to the inner truth of who they are. Most pain arises when we try to cling to what no longer fits. We want to return to the old self, the old role, the old sense of safety. However, that very attachment is what prolongs the crisis. This collapse is not here to destroy you. It is here to end a life structure that has already completed its purpose. In this video, you'll understand why the emptiness and the loss of direction are not signs of failure, but signs of a profound turning point. If you're in that stage, keep listening. Because this might be the moment your life begins in a completely different way. Number 1. When the foundation of your life breaks apart. There are phases in life when you don't need a major event to feel like you're falling apart. No accident, no obvious loss, no loud tragedy. Everything on the outside still goes on as normal. You still go to work, still fulfill responsibilities, still look stable in other people's eyes. But deep inside, a feeling appears that's hard to name. Something that once held your life steady is no longer there. The scariest part of this stage is not intense pain. It's the quiet loss of direction. You don't know exactly what you've lost. You only know that what once made you feel certain no longer reaches you inside. Each day passes like you're living in inertia. Not exactly miserable, but no longer truly alive. And that in-between state is what exhausts so many people without them understanding why. I once knew a friend who worked in banking. From the outside, his life looked like the model of stability. A good job, steady income, a solid position, and a clear path. But in a very ordinary conversation, he said, "I still go to work every day, but I no longer feel like I'm inside my own life." Nothing dramatic had happened before that. It was simply a moment when he realized that everything that once supported his identity had become hollow. The foundation was still there in shape, but it no longer had the strength to carry weight. From Carl Jung's perspective, this is not weakness or a lack of willpower. Jung believed a person can only sustain stability when their outer life still matches the inner structure within. When that mismatch lasts too long, the psyche begins to correct itself by dismantling what no longer fits. And that process rarely happens gently. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And for him, breakdowns like this are precisely the moments when the unconscious refuses to stay backstage any longer. What you have ignored, avoided, or suppressed for years starts pushing its way into the open, not as clear thoughts, but as emptiness, disorientation, and the shaking of everything familiar. At first, it often shows up as very ordinary questions. You begin to wonder why you're walking this path, why you're still continuing a rhythm of life that no longer gives you a sense of belonging, and whether the biggest choices in your life truly came from within or were simply adaptations to survive? For Jung, these are not luxury questions for people who overthink. They are signs that the soul is demanding honesty after being neglected for a long time. Imagine your life as a house built very early. Its foundation was not chosen by you. It was laid down by family, culture, expectations, and circumstances. For many years, you kept building on top of it, adding floors, rooms, and achievements that were recognized. The house may look sturdy from the outside, but if that foundation does not reflect who you truly are, sooner or later, cracks will appear. Not because you built it wrong, but because you're living on ground that no longer belongs to you. When the foundation begins to fracture, the natural human reflex is panic. We want to fix it, reinforce it, and return to the stable version as fast as possible. We look for more motivation, more goals, more plans. But Jung believed this is the most dangerous moment to act in haste. Because when the foundation collapses, what is happening is not only a situational crisis, it is a crisis of meaning. And meaning cannot be patched with surface solutions. What makes this stage so uncomfortable is that it has no clear shape. You can't point to exactly what you lost. You only know that what once held everything up inside you is gone. It's like standing on a bridge when you can't see the pillars underneath. Every step carries unease, even if the bridge hasn't fully fallen. Through a Jungian lens, this is not a sign you're on the wrong path. It's a sign you can't keep walking the old path in the old way anymore. A life structure has completed its role. And when a structure no longer serves the individual's growth, the psyche will find a way to dismantle it, whether you're ready or not. This part of the journey doesn't ask you to make huge decisions, and it doesn't demand immediate solutions. It asks for just one thing, extremely difficult but deeply important, to face the truth that the old foundation is ending. No denial, no rushing to repair, no blaming yourself. Simply recognizing that this sense of collapse is not a sign of failure. It's a signal that a way of living has reached its limit. And in the moment you dare to admit that, a new space begins to open. Not yet for rebuilding, not yet for starting over, but for listening. Because when the old foundation dissolves, what matters most is not what you will build next, but whether you have the courage not to rebuild the old simply because you fear the emptiness. If you stay with that emptiness long enough, it will not swallow you. It will tell you, for the first time, what kind of foundation you truly need in order to live. Number 2. The meaning hidden inside the collapse. When the old foundation has begun to dissolve, what frightens people most is no longer loss, but the sense of meaninglessness. Not because it hurts too much, but because you don't understand what is happening to you. And right here, a quiet question appears. If this collapse isn't random, then what is it trying to tell me? For Carl Jung, no psychological crisis appears only to destroy. Collapse, in many cases, is the soul's final language when every other way of communicating has failed. When gentle signals are ignored for too long, the unconscious stops hinting. It must intervene by shaking the entire structure you're leaning on, not to punish you, but to force you to stop and listen. In literary history, many characters only truly begin their journey after a complete breakdown. Think of Raskolnikov in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Before facing guilt and the inner truth within himself, he lived by a self-made ideal system, believing he stood above ordinary morality. but it was the psychological collapse, the suffocating confusion and relentless torment that shattered that structure. Only when he could no longer run did he have to look directly at himself. That collapse did not erase him. It began the process of becoming a real human being rather than an idea of one. Jung viewed such moments not through the lens of morality, but through the lens of psychology. He believed much suffering arises when a person lives too long inside an image of themselves, instead of living from their true nature. When that image can no longer withstand the pressure of real life, it breaks. And that breaking carries a message: it is time to change the inner order. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." For him, suffering is not an accident of growth, it is part of the condition. No expansion of consciousness happens through prolonged comfort. When something in you begins to realize your current life no longer reflects the inner truth, pain appears as an alarm signal, not to make you collapse, but to wake you up. The problem is that we often misunderstand what this signal means. We treat suffering as proof that we went the wrong way, that we must quickly return to the old stable state. But in Jung's view, that stability is the problem if it is built on self-denial. When collapse happens, what is destroyed first is not your true self, but the story you tell yourself about who you are. Imagine your psychological life as a garden. For years, you've planted the same kind of tree and cared for it the same way. At first, the garden was lush, but at some point, the soil starts to lose its richness. The tree no longer grows, even though you still water it faithfully. If you only keep adding fertilizer without changing the soil, the garden will keep weakening. Collapse is like the moment you are forced to accept the soil is old, and pulling things up, turning the earth over, is unavoidable. For Jung, the meaning of collapse is not in the event itself, but in what it forces you to face. It reveals parts of you that have been neglected, real needs that were pushed down to fit in, to be accepted, to be safe. When everything runs smoothly, we can keep ignoring those parts. But when the structure collapses, truth has nowhere left to hide. What matters is that collapse is not moral. It doesn't say you are right or wrong. It only says an inner order has completed its role. And if you try to return to that order simply because you fear the unknown, the crisis will repeat in another form. Jung called this living in unconscious resistance against yourself. The meaning hidden behind collapse, then, is not a moral lesson, but an invitation. An invitation to stop. An invitation to look deeper. An invitation to question how you are living, instead of only asking how to make everything okay again. When you allow yourself to remain with uncertainty long enough, you begin to see that not everything that disappears is a loss. Some things leave because they have finished their mission in your life. If you've stayed with me this far, take a slow moment and leave just one sentence in the comments. I am willing to look at this. No need to tell the story. Just a sign that you have begun to view your experience with honesty. Because the moment you dare to admit what you truly feel, collapse begins to shift from enemy to guide. And that is when the deeper journey into the parts you once avoided is finally ready to open. Number 3. The departure of the old self. The moment you begin to understand that collapse not only has meaning, but is also demanding that something must end, the journey moves into a deeper layer. It's no longer the question, why is this happening? But a very clear feeling that the person you used to be cannot keep walking with you anymore. This is the part that makes many people hesitate most, because it's not about repair or rebuilding, it's about departure. A quiet departure with no ceremony, yet leaving a very real emptiness behind. From Carl Jung's perspective, no rebirth happens without a psychological death alongside it. Jung called this process the necessary dissolution of the old ego. The ego is not bad. It helps you locate yourself in the world, build roles, survive, and be recognized. But Jung emphasized that the ego is only a temporary structure. When a person outgrows that structure yet still clings to it, a crisis appears as an inner force that breaks it apart. A follower of the channel once shared a story with me. He wrote that for many years, he defined himself by always being strong and never complaining. When everything started to collapse, he tried to do what was familiar, endure more, stay silent more, tell himself everything would be fine. But that response drained him faster. He said, "What hurt me most wasn't the loss. It was realizing that the person who always endured could no longer help me keep living." That moment didn't offer a solution, but it marked the end of an identity he had carried for too long. Jung believed this is where many people confuse the ego with their whole being. When the ego shakes, we think we are disappearing. But in truth, only a way of living, an image, a role, is reaching its limit. And the most painful part is not the dissolution itself, but resisting it. Because the ego always wants to survive, even when it no longer serves the life within. Imagine listening to your own old voice in a recording from years ago. Back then, every word sounded certain, fitting the person you were. But hearing it now, you realize you no longer speak like that, no longer think like that. Not because that voice was wrong, but because it belonged to a version that has passed. The departure of the old self is like that. Not loud, not dramatic, just a moment when you realize you cannot keep speaking in that voice if you want to live truthfully. Jung wrote, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." For him, there are stages in life that don't need fixing because they are not mistakes. There are signs the old self has reached its limit. You don't get through by solving, you get through by growing beyond and leaving. The departure of the old self, therefore, is not a tragedy. It is a necessary shift, so life can continue. At this stage, many people try to start over too soon. They want a new version to appear immediately to fill the emptiness. But Jung warned that if the old self is not allowed to end fully, any beginning will only be a disguised continuation. The old ego will return in another form, carrying the same unresolved contradictions. The real departure of the old self often comes with a deeply uncomfortable state, not knowing who you are. You no longer have clear definitions, no quick answers to familiar questions. But Jung didn't see this as being lost. He saw it as a necessary transitional zone, where old structures dissolve deeply enough for a new order to form. If you rush out of this zone, you carry the confusion into the next stage. What makes this stage painful is that it touches the ego's greatest fear directly: loss of control. You no longer know how to respond, no longer have a role to hold on to, and no longer have an image to protect you. But in that nakedness, Jung believed, a person has the first real chance to touch something deeper within themselves, something not built to impress, but built to live. The departure of the old self doesn't require you to hate it or deny it. On the contrary, Jung believed the old self must be seen with respect. It did the best it could under the conditions you had then. Its leaving does not devalue the past. It acknowledges the past has completed its role. When you stop fighting to keep an image that is no longer alive, pain begins to change shape. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes more orderly. To begin again, when everything collapses, the lesson here is not action. It is permission. Permission for a version of you to end. Permission to not know, to be uncertain, to have no clear image of the future. Only when you stop clinging to the old self out of fear of emptiness does the emptiness stop being an enemy. It becomes the space where something truer can appear. And this is Jung's great paradox for us. Sometimes to begin again, you don't need to push forward. You need to stop and let go. Let go of the self that helped you survive, so the self that can help you live truthfully can be born. Number 4. Entering the dark region of the soul. So after the old self has left, what truly waits ahead? When you can no longer return to familiar patterns, but you also don't yet have a clear shape for a new self, what do you do with that emptiness? Carl Jung believed that it is precisely at this suspended point that a person enters the most important stage of beginning again, facing the dark region of the soul. The dark region, for Jung, is not a place of evil or degeneration. It is where the parts of you are stored that were left behind because they didn't fit, weren't accepted, or were too hard to live with. Repressed emotions, unnamed conflicts, intuitions dismissed as irrational. Jung called this whole domain the shadow, and he emphasized that the shadow is not something you create. It forms as you learn how to become acceptable. Jung said, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality." For him, the shadow is not only psychological, but it is an inner ethical challenge. It forces you to face what you do not want to admit about yourself. And if you don't do it consciously, the shadow will find ways to enter your life through less controllable paths. To picture it, imagine you've gotten used to compressing your emotions the way you keep forcing things into an overstuffed bag. At first, you do it skillfully. You know how to fold, how to press down, how to pull the zipper hard. The bag still closes, and from the outside, everything looks fine. But eventually, one small push, and the zipper bursts open. Not because you packed badly, but because it has been overloaded for a long time. The dark region of the soul is like that. It doesn't appear because you're weak. It appears because you've tried for too long to keep everything under rational control. From a scientific perspective, what Jung described is supported today by research on emotion and the nervous system. When emotions are not processed consciously, they don't disappear. They are stored in the body and brain, shaping stress responses, emotional regulation, and relationships. The reactions of, "I don't know why I'm like this," are often not random. There are traces of parts pushed into the dark for too long. Crisis in this case is not the cause, it is the consequence of prolonged silence. Jung believed that within the darkness there is not only pain, but also something paradoxical, a part of you that loved you before your rational mind could understand. It is instinct, intuition, raw feeling, the part that once knew what made you feel alive, what made you shrink. When you enter the dark region, you meet not only fear, but the most honest part of you, the part sacrificed so you could fit in, be safe, be accepted. This idea doesn't exist only in psychology, it's mirrored in myth as well. Think of Persephone in Greek mythology. She didn't choose to descend into the underworld, but once there, she wasn't destroyed. She became queen of another realm, learning to govern cycles of death and rebirth. Jung saw Persephone as a profound symbol. Darkness is not only a place of loss, but it is where consciousness expands. Not everyone who descends is swallowed, but no one descends and remains the old self. Jung would say this is the invitation of the unconscious. When rejected parts begin to appear, they are not asking you to act them out. They are asking you to see them. The shadow doesn't want to control you. It wants to be acknowledged. And when it is acknowledged, it loses its destructive power. Many people fear that entering the dark will drown them in negativity. But Jung believed that what is more dangerous is believing you have no dark region at all. When you don't acknowledge it, you unconsciously project it outward, seeing others as the cause of every conflict, repeating familiar painful relationships, or turning criticism back on yourself. What is not allowed to live will find a way to live through you. Entering the dark is not obsessively digging through the past, and it's not sinking into suffering. Jung emphasized it is an attitude, staying with experience without rushing to judge. When you allow unbeautiful emotions to be present in consciousness, they begin to change shape. Not because you control them, but because you no longer abandon them. Conscious presence is the thread that lets you enter the labyrinth and still find your way out. On the journey of beginning again when everything collapses, this is a step you cannot skip. You cannot build anything new if you keep splitting yourself apart. Entering the dark does not make you weaker. It makes you more whole. Not perfect, not neat, but real. And for Jung, only a whole person can live a meaningful life rather than merely exist inside approved roles. Pause for 1 second and ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you saw that forgotten version of yourself? If you have the courage, share in the comments, not to explain or analyze, but so you can hear again what you have kept silent for too long. Number 5. The path of rebirth from chaos. And after you have been brave enough to pass through the dark region of the soul, you begin to realize chaos is no longer only something that destroys you. It starts rearranging you from within in a very different way. Not through big decisions or dramatic declarations, but through a quiet shift in how you live with yourself. Carl Jung never saw rebirth as returning to the old state. For him, rebirth happens only when you stop resisting and accept that the old has completed its role. Jung wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it." This acceptance is not surrender. It is the moment when the energy trapped in resistance is released. When you stop trying to fix the past, a new order begins to form from the remaining fragments. Not hurried, not loud, but more durable. Because it is built on truth rather than fear. At this stage, rebirth doesn't come by adding more. It comes by removing. Removing roles that once helped you survive, but now exhaust you. Removing expectations that don't come from within. Removing the habit of having to prove you're fine. Jung believed that when you stop maintaining structures that have completed their purpose, the energy that was trapped begins to return on its own, without force. There is a very common experience that many people have after a crisis. They don't immediately change jobs, don't move environments, and don't make big decisions. But they start sleeping more deeply, eating more slowly, and paying more attention to their body. They stop forcing themselves to be positive or strong the way they used to. From the outside, everything can look normal, but inside, the way they are present with life has changed. Jung called that rebirth, when life is no longer driven by the pressure to return to an old image, but by inner alignment. In Jung's view, the biggest mistake at this stage is trying to fix yourself too early. When you rush to rebuild, you only raise another structure as fragile as the old one. True rebirth doesn't happen through control. It happens through permission. Permission to slow down. Permission not to know. Permission to live without a complete map. When the ego no longer occupies the entire stage, the self begins to lead, not through commands, but through a feeling of being in the right place. What's striking is that this rebirth doesn't feel euphoric. It brings a strange steadiness, even if the outer circumstances haven't changed much. You may still not see the road ahead clearly, but you know one thing with certainty. You can no longer return to the old way of living without betraying yourself. Jung saw this as the true measure of beginning again, not what you achieve, but that you no longer live against your inner truth. To picture it, imagine you've used a phone for years and almost never cleared its storage. Old photos, apps you no longer use, and background data keep piling up. At first, it only slows a little. Then one day, everything feels heavy, the battery drains fast, and the system reacts strangely. Not because the phone is broken, but because it's carrying too much that it no longer needs. The path of rebirth from chaos is like that. It's not about becoming a brighter, more dazzling version of yourself. It's about stopping the burden of what has overloaded you, so your natural vitality can return. In practice, Jung didn't advise you to make a grand plan to rebuild your life at this stage. What you need is honest observation. Observe what makes you contract and what makes you feel lighter, even slightly. Observe which relationships drain you and which moments allow you to breathe deeply without effort. Don't rush to judge. Don't rush to fix. Just listen. That listening is the foundation of the new order. You can begin with very simple choices, slowing your pace, reducing the need to explain who you are, easing the pressure to be fine by old standards. Jung believed that when you stop spending energy maintaining an old image, that energy naturally returns inward. And from there, the new structure begins to form without being forced. At this stage, many things may fall away naturally. Some relationships drift, some goals lose their appeal. Jung didn't see that as a loss, but a necessary simplification. Like storage being cleared, the system doesn't need more new apps to function better. It just needs enough space to run according to its nature. The path of rebirth from chaos, then, is not a fast upward climb. It is a return to a real rhythm of life. You don't rebuild your life with the same patterns that made you collapse. You allow a different structure to form through small choices, slow choices, but true ones. This requires patience because it doesn't bring the old feeling of progress. But Jung believed all genuine beginnings happen this way. And if you've stayed with me this far, perhaps some part of you has recognized you're in this very stage. If you want, leave a short comment sharing what it felt like when everything began to collapse. No analysis, no explanation. Just a few honest lines. Sometimes, daring to name your experience is the first step for a new order to begin forming. Number 6. A new beginning from the true self. At the end of this journey, when what no longer belongs to you has gradually fallen away, and chaos no longer makes you panic, but simply makes you listen, a big change begins. Not the moment you find the answer, but the moment you stop running from the question of yourself. And here, a new beginning appears, not as a big decision, but as a very quiet return. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." He didn't call it a duty, and he didn't call it a goal. He called it a privilege, because many people go through an entire life without ever touching it. A new beginning, in Jung's view, is not building a different person. It is removing enough so the real person can breathe. In a Jungian therapy session I once witnessed, a woman sat across in silence for a long time. Not because she was confused, but because for the first time she stopped rushing to fill the emptiness with words. Then she spoke slowly, as if she were listening to herself. "I don't know where I'll go next, but for the first time, I don't have to pretend I'm fine." No plan was set, no clear path appeared. Yet in Jung's spirit, that moment marked a real beginning. When the ego stops maintaining an image and controlling the narrative, the self finally has space to appear, not through grand statements, but through a quiet feeling, being where you belong. A new beginning from the true self does not arrive as a spectacular rebirth. It arrives at the end of inner fragmentation. Before this, you may have lived well, played your role correctly. But inside, you were split between what you do and what you feel. Jung believed there is no wound longer lasting than this split. And there is no healing deeper than restoring inner unity. At this stage, you begin to realize something essential. You don't need to become a better version of yourself. You need to become a truer one. It sounds simple, but it takes immense courage. Because living truthfully means you are no longer protected by roles, titles, or expectations. You begin to feel clearly what makes you come alive and what drains you, even if you used to be very good at enduring. Jung called this process individuation. Not separating yourself from the world, but stopping the loss of yourself within the world. As the self gradually takes the central role, your choices begin to change, not because you force change, but because you can no longer do otherwise. You can no longer stay in relationships that make you contract. You can no longer chase goals that leave you empty inside, even if they once gave you many things. To picture it, imagine a river that has long been blocked by too much debris and obstruction. The water still moves, but the current twists, creating undertows, collisions, and noise. As the obstacles are cleared away, the river doesn't need to be taught how to flow. It naturally finds its direction again. A new beginning from the true self is like that. You don't need to learn how to live. You need to clear the way so the life within you can continue. From Jung's perspective, the self doesn't command. It doesn't tell you what you must do. It reveals itself through a sense of rightness, even when it isn't always comfortable. When you live out of alignment with the self, you can still succeed, still be recognized, but there will always be a background noise inside. When you live closer to the self, life may not be fully stable yet, but the inner world becomes quieter. Jung saw this as the clearest sign of a true beginning. This new beginning also carries responsibility. When you live from your true self, you can no longer blame circumstances or roles. You begin to see your part in every choice. That can frighten you, because there is nowhere left to hide. But at the same time, it brings a deep freedom. Jung believed freedom is not doing whatever you want. It is daring to take responsibility for your inner truth. In practice, living from the true self doesn't require you to have answers right away. It begins with honesty in daily experience. Honest when you need rest. Honesty when a relationship no longer nourishes you. Honest when you're not ready to move forward. Jung emphasized that the self is strengthened not through big decisions, but through consistency between what you feel and what you allow yourself to live. One clear sign of a new beginning is that you no longer need to explain yourself so much. You stop telling your life story to be understood, validated, and praised. You can say, "I'm changing," without defending it. Not because you've become cold, but because you now have an inner anchor. This new beginning from the true self does not promise an easier life. It promises a life with less inner conflict. You will still face difficulties, still have to choose, but you will no longer feel like you're living the wrong role. And for Jung, that is the foundation of a meaningful life. When everything in life collapses, the most painful part is not only what you lose, but the feeling that you no longer know where you stand. But through Carl Jung's lens, collapse has never been the end. It is a turning point, a moment that forces you to stop